We hope you enjoy this podcast. All our conversations are inspired by films we have selected to appear on SDG.VISION. So go and take a look and be inspired by people and organisations who are making valuable contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and making our world a better place for everybody to live. Now, sit back, enjoy, be inspired, and afterwards, go and take action.
Well, a very warm SDG Vision welcome to Rachel Casey and Ryan Heeley from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Hello to both of you.
Hello, thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. I'm really glad you can be with us. Now, what roles have you got with the Joseph Rowntree? Rachel, your role at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is?
So I'm a policy advisor at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So I work predominantly on policy and ideas in the organisation.
Terrific. And Ryan, what about you?
Hi, so I'm content producer at JRF. So I work within their design and production team and really work across all areas of JRF to articulate our mission and our vision. So work across all our campaigns, basically to articulate in usually quite a simple way our messages to our audiences, and quite often work in mixed media formats such as video and photography to communicate our messages.
Terrific. Now, some people might find it a bit unusual that we've got policy and creatives on the same podcast, which I think is terrific. There is a reason behind our madness, or perceived madness, perhaps, there. One of the reasons, or the central reason, is that both Rachel and Ryan were central to the filming of 4 films that we're featuring on SDG Vision. And it was those films that caused us to contact Joseph Rowntree Foundation to see if you'd come on the podcast. And there are 4 films that are set predominantly in the north of England, I think in Sunderland, Northumbria, Doncaster, and Hartlepool. And they're in what you could perhaps call deprived areas, or areas of pretty much extreme social and economic hardship. And Ryan and Rachel led on those, and it was, as you'll see, I mean, I really do encourage people to look at the films because they are quite short. They're about 3 or 4 minutes long, but they're very much user led. So it's the people who are experiencing change and being allowed to experience change and find change themselves to talk about their experiences. And we'll come on to that a little bit later in the podcast to see how that was achieved, because they are, I think they're very interesting films from a sort of a community development perspective. And I think they show how brave the Rowntree Foundation is in terms of its funding. And I think, as we'll say, we need a lot more of that bravery in the current economic and social climate that we're in at the moment. But first, I think perhaps for those who don't know anything about the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, I guess it would be useful to say, what is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation? When was it founded? And what does it do today?
So the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is an independent social change organisation working to support and speed up the transition to a more equitable and just future, free from poverty, where people and planet can flourish. And we were established over a century ago by Joseph Rowntree, who was a social pioneer and visionary. He was also a chocolatier in York. And he established the Joseph Rowntree Foundation over a century ago to help understand the root causes and systemic issues underlying social injustices such as poverty. And he actually died exactly 100 years ago this week. Actually, it was on the 24th that we had a big centenary celebration of his life. And I guess the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is continuing with that vision in the work that we do today. So we do work, as I said, within policy. So I'm sort of part of the policy and advocacy work that the organisation does. And a big part of that is our work at the moment is increasingly focused on shining their light really on the fundamental aspects of how our economy works, including the issues of power and wealth. And that sits at the heart of economic insecurity that we see today and poverty in the UK.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that Joseph Rowntree, he was an industrialist, effectively, but also a social reformer, an economic reformer as well. Something that a lot of industrialists today could really learn from, I think. So we're talking about poverty, and obviously poverty 100 years ago was different, or was it, to poverty today. What would you say, what does hardship look like in the UK at the moment?
So, recent decades, we've seen poverty has deepened in the UK, and you can see that with food bank use being at a record high. Actually, the Joseph Rowntree, we run a cost of living tracker, and we have at least 7 million households going without the essentials in the UK right now. So to us, our definition of going without the essentials is being unable to feed their family, stay warm, replace something that's broken. So if you've got a washing machine, it breaks, you can't replace it, or find the help they need when they need it. So, but that's 7 million households right now going without the essentials.
Yes, I mean that's that. I mean, in the UK at the moment, for those who don't live here, I don't really know the population size is 60, 65 million, is it perhaps?
Yeah, and just to add as well, just the other week, JRF released our annual UK poverty report, and that it's the headline figures in that with that 14.3 million people are living in poverty in the UK. And of those numbers, 4.3 million are children. So it just sort of highlights the scale of the issue in the UK.
Yeah, and I think that inequality probably hasn't. It's very high in terms of those at the rich level and those at the poor level. The gap is huge, absolutely huge. So I was wondering, really, I mean, I've obviously looked. I've been aware of the work of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation for a number of years, but I looked, just preparing for this interview and this conversation. I looked at the website and I was incredibly impressed and really encouraged by the fact that JRF looks at exploring the way that communities can tackle hardship. And I wonder why that is. Why is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation focusing on communities as a way out of poverty?
So JRF's always had some sort of, our founding work, was based in New Music in York. Joseph Rowntree built housing, provided education, etc. So we've always had some sort of contact or context with community and working within the community. But in the last couple of years, we've been exploring the power of communities to tackle hardship. And we've done that for a few reasons, really. So as I said at the outset, we've seen poverty deepening in the UK. And we've seen that through food bank use as one example of that. But we've also seen through some of the work that we've done to explore the power of communities that many community organisations are overwhelmed by high level of hardship, and that's actually preventing them to focus on longer term work. So they're kind of constantly firefighting. And so the voluntary and charitable and social enterprise sector, the VCSE sector, they're picking up the slack. And they've done that because of a couple of reasons, really. I mean, we've seen pretty deep cuts to local authority budgets since 2010s. And that's really impacted discretionary and preventative services, such as children's centres, youth services, housing support. And we've also seen the lasting impacts, obviously, of the financial crash in 2008. So then we've had consecutive economic crises such as Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis. So it's all really kind of ramped up and increased the demand on public services, but also on voluntary and community and charitable services who have been picking up the slack. And we've also seen places of with the highest levels of deprivation, so places like where am I from, Stoke-on-Trent, the post-industrial legacies, really, the North and the Midlands, and also some London boroughs too, have been most impacted by these economic crises. And also these are places that, I guess, I don't like to use the term left behind. It was actually really interesting. We were talking about this earlier. In Hartlepool, we interviewed Sasha, who runs the Annex at the Wharton Trust. And he said the same thing. He didn't like to use the term left behind because these places never really were kind of at a level playing field in the first place. And I guess that's true when you look at the level of deprivation. And so we did some work with the local trust who contributed to an essay series that we did prior to the films. And there was about 225 doubly disadvantaged neighbourhoods in the UK. So that doubly disadvantaged means that they're experiencing high levels of material deprivation, but they're also experiencing the lowest levels of social infrastructure. So that social infrastructure is really key. So that's like places, spaces and organisations that enable people to come together and to connect. The social clubs used to do that. Unions used to do that. I mean, we've seen a retreat of that. And that does have consequences. And it's a problem because it's the power of communities and local services to reach out, to prevent issues spiralling. And that's been weakened when you lack that social infrastructure. And that piles further pressure on overstretched public services. So we've seen that. And even in places that don't lack that sort of social infrastructure, we still see that like I said, prior to this, the VCSE sector picking up the slack. So I think after all of that, we felt it was really important that there is a really crucial role that communities can play. So the government needs to do its bit, to tackle some of the root causes. So we do a lot of work at the Joseph Rowntree around the adequacy of the social security system. And we know right now it doesn't provide enough to cover life's essentials. Housing isn't genuinely affordable. There's a massive housing crisis going on. And we also have a problem with quality jobs, ones that pay well, ones that have good conditions, ones that kind of don't make you ill. So there is a lot of things that need to happen at that structural level, but there's always a role to play by communities and local services to protect people, to prevent hardship from spiralling, to detect things, to pick up on things that public services just aren't able to do. And we see that in a really important way. So communities can provide people with emergency support. They build social connections, strengthening community power, and finding advice and practical help. And that all happens at the local level, at the neighbourhood level, at the community level. So that's why we wanted to kind of really develop our thinking around what role communities actually play in tackling hardship, what the work that was already going on and has been going on for a very long time. And also the pressures that the communities are under because of the failure of the state, because of the retreat of the state, for the reasons that I've outlined. So that's kind of where we got to with the films. So we did, prior to the films, we commissioned 12, a series of essays. We commissioned a number of people that do a lot of thinking in this space, do a lot of doing in this space, to write about what they think, what they think the government needs to help communities, how they can help communities, how it can enable communities, strengthen communities, but also like what communities are doing to tackle hardship. So the films are actually case studies from these essays. And we really, really wanted to give voice, amplify this work, because the films really give real life examples of communities and local services coming together to tackle hardship and challenges in their communities and their neighbourhoods and their places, and often against the odds as well. And we really wanted to show this because they're displaying approaches to work, innovative ideas, kind of things that you would think weren't that innovative, but they're changing their approach to how they, say, for example, Gateshead. We did some filming with Changing Futures Northumbria. So Changing Futures is actually part of a bigger pilot scheme that's gone on over the last few years. And it was really interesting the way that they approach delivery to public services, because they have been on this transformational journey. And it was just amazing just to see something so simple in the way that they're doing work, the liberated method, they call it. And it just frees up this kind of ability to actually support people and wrap support around people, and removes the kind of gatekeeping and barriers that people experience when they access public services, especially for the people that they work with, or people that end up in A&E quite a bit. They have multiple unmet needs. And so they're constantly in sort of crisis, or they're unable to kind of move out of a crisis. And they've had real success, and it's all down to their approach, their relational way of working. So it's just those films really bring to life and amplify what we want to show that can be done, and that there's a lot of hope in these communities, a lot of hope, there's a lot of change that's happening. And that doesn't necessarily translate or isn't captured in an essay or in a report or the filming. And this is why we wanted to move on to the filming, is that we wanted to show what's actually happening, give people a voice, and to amplify what they're doing, how they're doing it, the reality of the situation. We're not sugarcoating it. It's not kind of a light-hearted look into communities and look, oh, we're great, everything's all fine. It's real life, but also I think it captures the strength that people have, the resilience, and actually just people get on with it. They get on with it, and they just need some support. They need that capacity to be strengthened. So yeah, that's why we decided to do the films, really.
I think there's so much in what you said.
Sorry, I just went on a bit of a rampage
No,
there.
not at all. No. Everything you said really spoke to the question, and I think is absolutely vital. One of the earlier things you said was that a lot of organisations now, government, public sector bodies, but also charities, the state of the economic crisis is such, and the extent of hardship is such that they're putting out fires all the time. rather than being able to have the space and the time to address the problems, and give it the time and space and the resources to do it on a long-term basis. The interesting thing about your films is every single one, I think, speaks to the importance of long-term work, going at the pace of the person who's experiencing crisis. I used the term beneficiary early on, and as soon as it left my lips, I kind of regretted saying that, because that almost indicates a passive role of somebody who's receiving support. But actually, I think in your films, it's about engagement between those who are providing the support and listening very acutely to what people are saying, and giving them the time to develop their confidence and to trust the organization and to work out their own ways of getting out of crisis. So I think that's why I said at the beginning that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is a brave funder, I think, because a lot of funders, they want the key performance indicators. They want instant results. It's changing a little bit, but that's still quite common. And it seems to me that is not the case. You mentioned the liberated method, where that sort of pressure for quick outcomes doesn't seem to be there so much. Am I misreading it, or would you agree?
I think on that as well. Like, I think we went. One of the films that we did was working with People Focused Group in Doncaster, and one of the things that they do, they've set up a warden program that essentially people within the community who are also getting support themselves also offer support back in different ways. So people can sign up to be part of the warden program as well, and they can go out to people's houses who might not necessarily have seen anybody for weeks or months or years, and then through the warden program they have that direct connection with them. So it brings people into the fold and stuff. And from the conversation we had, it was kind of like it was they were making that point where it's like you can't necessarily measure the impact of that in numbers. It's really hard to sort of if they're needing to be measured in hard stats or whatever in terms of like the impact of the work. It's really difficult for them to do that, because the work that they might do, they might get one or two people in a day to their services through that program, and then the actual impact on those people is transformative. Like it can be so impactful, but you can't measure that in numbers. So I think that's a really important point to make in terms of kind of that came back through in a lot of the films that we produce, and also that point around sort of obviously people having that ownership as well and empowering people on the journey. I think we spoke to a lady called Lizzie in Hartlepool. She'd been through a really hard time. She'd been homeless. She'd sort of had a breakdown of she didn't have sort of like a family or friends contacts where she was, and she ended up moving to Hartlepool. And I think she first interacted with the Annex, which was the project that we did the film with in Hartlepool, through sort of, I think on a Thursday she was going to get like food, and kind of like it was that initial kind of provision that she was first interacting with. But then over time she built a confidence. She kind of used a network through the Annex and the support that they gave her to be able to, now she's volunteering herself and she's supporting others, and she's using her lived experience to kind of help other people, which I think is like a massive sort of example of that sort of empowerment that these sort of programs are offering to people and communities. Yeah,
and I think that what it does show also is that poverty is complex. It's not, there's not just one form of poverty that people experience. Often it's physical hardship through not having food, but also loneliness, isolation, not having somebody they can trust to talk with, etc. And I guess that's where community and the power of community comes through. And I think it was the Doncaster one that I think you mentioned, Rachel, that I think it's Doncaster, where, you know, the people, the wardens are sometimes they receive support, but they also give support. And that's fantastic, isn't it, in terms of encouraging self-confidence or building self-confidence, respect, self-respect. And it goes back to that whole thing when my mistaken use of the word beneficiary, you know, that it's not a passive thing, that it's a dialogue, it's an engagement, which is so important. So, of course, community is really important, but we mustn't let government off the hook as well. They use our tax dollars, and they ought to use it wisely. Do you think that government is doing enough to address, I suppose, the root causes of hardship? What do you think?
So I think the government could do more to act to address the root causes. I mean, we run a campaign called Guarantee the Essentials. So Social Security is at the lowest that it's been in decades. So the basic rate of Social Security, which is the universal credit now, it's the lowest that it's been for decades. And to the point where it's not helping people, it's not providing people with the essentials. So people are going without food, they're going without warmth, they're going without, you know, basic toiletries, for example. They're not able to cover those essentials. And that's something that we're campaigning extremely hard on, because that is the point of a welfare system. The safety net should be there to help people to get back on their feet. It shouldn't be another barrier to supporting people. And it makes it harder. I mean, we've seen that the low rate of Social Security is a barrier to people moving into work, which is a big priority of the government at the moment, moving people that are classed as economically inactive into employment. Well, you know, if you haven't got money to put food on your table, your basic rate can't cover. You can't, you know, you can't heat your home, you can't wash your clothes, you can't look presentable for jobs. You know, you can't afford the transport to a job interview, for example. You know, those are things that the government surely can act on by improving the inadequacy of the social security system. So that's something that we're continuing to campaign on, that the basic rate shouldn't ever go below the essentials basket. So what you really need to be able to afford the basics. And also the government are actually looking into reforming crisis and emergency support at the moment. So at the moment we have the Household Support Fund, which was introduced during COVID. So it's there to help people when they're in a crisis. So, you know, like if they have an unexpected cost, it's also being used to help cover other aspects of kind of emergencies at the moment. And they're looking to reform that very basic level of sort of emergency support, local welfare assistance. I mean, some it's such a patchwork across the country. Some areas don't really have a local welfare assistance scheme, and some do. And we've seen sort of the increasing demand on, as sort of the reasons outlined earlier, we've seen an increasing demand for emergency support. So people cycling in and out of this emergency support. So we're working at the moment to try and influence the government on, and try and sort of support the government with how to reform this in a way that provides a permanent local welfare scheme, and that it should be available everywhere to everyone in the country. and it should be a duty, a statutory duty, to be able to deliver it, obviously with the appropriate funding too. But also for that to work and for it not to become a sticking plaster, you really need to tackle the issue, which is further up the pond, which is an inadequate social security system, housing costs that are through the roof, and not even lack of available social housing, etc. So yes, the government can do more. Whether they are talking about building more social housing, they are talking about the Employment Rights Bill, sort of improving sort of working conditions. They have they have talked about reforming local welfare support, but they obviously are now looking at a $3 billion hole in their welfare budget and looking to find cuts somewhere for it, looking at councils that are nearing on bankruptcy because of the high level of demand that are on their services. So they've got a big task, a massive task, a really hard task. But we think that, there are things that can be done to tackle poverty. It's a political decision. You can do something.
Well, no, I mean, I think as you say, it in a sense, it needs a radical restructuring. We had Danish Riskandaraja on from the New Economics Foundation on the podcast. And, he pointed to a series of things that could be implemented, such as, citizens' assemblies, etc., for people to have a voice and to engage with government on a more meaningful level. But of course, as you say, there are competing priorities, and not everybody sees hardship and poverty as a priority, sadly. But have you felt that is there an open ear, or is there an ear to talk into from your experience with I don't know, local, regional, or national government?
I think there are lots of things. I mean, there are certain things that can be done in terms of communities and neighbourhoods. So in the English Devolution Bill, for example, they've looked at community right to buy, sort of asset transfers to communities. And there's not enough in the English Devolution Bill really on the role of neighbourhoods and the link between local authorities and community, like sort of neighbourhood level. But there is, I was at an event, I think it was at the beginning of this year, and it was run by Demos, and it was on the future of public services. And Georgia Gould, who's a parliamentary secretary for, I think permanent or parliament, I can't remember, but she's there for the cabinet office, and she used to be leader of Camden Council, that have sort of implemented really innovative ways of delivering children's social care, to look at demand and prevention. And she was talking a lot about the way departments at governmental level work in siloed ways, and that we need to break that down, be able to kind of work across departments, and looking at shifting the culture. So we've heard a lot about language changing in terms of shifting the culture towards collaboration between civil society and the state, partnership working. So that's interesting to me, and it makes me think that, obviously this is something that we've sort of learned from across our work around communities, and the importance of that culture shift, that change in approach to power. Shifting that power, and it comes from the top as much as it comes from the bottom. You need people in power to have a different approach to the way that it designs and implements or looks to kind of tackle social issues. So that's been really interesting to hear. I mean, at the moment they're consulting on local government funding, and a lot of the messages that we heard from people in the films, and from a lot of the work that we've done through the essays and through some research with New Local is the not just the lack of funding, but the fact that it's so short term. It's really hard to do anything with short term funding and not having guarantee that it's going to be renewed or you're going to have to bid for more. And I think it was that real message that, you need long-term funding for communities, a good decade minimum to kind of develop the work. It takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. And I think there's been too much I think there was a big feeling there's been too much short-termism, sticking plaster funds, fragmented funding. And I think there's a big thing that the government have started to think about is the way that they could potentially pool budgets. They could look at devolving and integrating kind of services. So there has been some real positive noises. Obviously, it's I still feel that there's a bit of a gap between what that means for the neighbourhood level, for the community level, and what that means for place-based budgets, what that means for, kind of the way that services work. Are they going to be person-centred, relational, like we've seen changing futures, like the difference that's made, and the way that they work. And just that we know that it works, that it's really effective. So yeah, it's. I think that the door is open, and I think there is definitely people in government that understand the issues and are looking at the moment for people to bring them the kind of ideas, I guess. But I think it's not necessarily a negative at the moment. There's a lot of stuff going on, and as I said, it's not a short-term fix.
No, and I think that as you mentioned, that the days of working in silos really should be over, and if you can get across that message to politicians at every level, that they need to join up and work in an integrated way. I mean, that's why we're so keen on Sustainable Development Goals, because they show that issues that should concern, environmentally, on a social level and an economic level, they're all interlinked. And for well-being and for the planet and people and the planet to thrive, you need to look at it as a whole and look at the different parts and how they interrelate with each other and interact with each other. So I think that's really interesting, and I wish you well in your work there, because I think that it's really important that this. I mean, it's similar to what Danish Riskandarajah was saying. That we need to enable those in power to look at things differently, perhaps, and have a different focus on things. So we've talked about the films, which, I was really impressed by. I think they're fantastic. And, what I thought was wonderful, which I learned later, and you've alluded to, that they were actually going to be a series of reports. So I think they initially started as a series of reports, and then they became films. And I think that's obviously a far more engaging way for people to understand and to learn about issues that are as important as the ones that you focus on. So I was just wondering, Ryan, really, what are Joseph Rowntree Foundation's ethical sort of storytelling principles? Are there any? I imagine there are, and how were they developed?
Yeah, sure. So I think fundamentally, obviously, behind the work that we do at JRF, we really want to portray and be representative of the people that are at the heart of our work. So to be ethical in the way that we produce things like film is really crucial and underpins sort of projects like this. Really, it takes a precedent over the final outputs, to be honest. So the final outputs are obviously one thing, but we want to ensure with anything else that the contributors are prioritised. So really, when we're thinking about sort of ethical storytelling within JRF, traditionally, I suppose, like you might sometimes get the case where sort of the storyteller, so for example JRF, or if we commissioned a videographer or a photographer to go out and commission to capture some work, they might hold more of a power, and also thinking about the audience as well. So if we're targeting this at decision makers and policy makers within government, they might inherently have more power within the content than actually the contributors who we're working with, whose messages we're portraying. So really fundamentally, underneath our principles is this idea of like putting the contributors first. So really elevating them up. So we did some work about 2 years ago now with they were called the Stigma Free Design Futures team, which were part of JRF. It was made up of people from all different experiences. We worked really closely with them on a project. Actually, it was to commission some photography, but with a stigma-free lens we brought to it all. So that project really was all about sort of creating imagery that represented people in a true reflection. So communities and people who were affected by the injustices of poverty, really doing that in a way that was representative to them. So what underpinned that process really was we worked with a photographer, an amazing photographer called Heeley. One of the images actually from that commission has just won Portrait of Britain award this year. So it was like a part of that project was we really focused with the Stigma Free group to really zone in on kind of our ways of working and our principles, and we developed up a set of principles during that process that we now use across all our kind of like content gathering processes, and that can be across photography and filmmaking. Some of the principles that we developed up, for example, include being collaborative. So contributors, ensuring that contributors really shape what we are portraying in the process. So really kind of like giving them that platform to be able to develop up the messaging with us. For example, on these films, we worked really closely in pre-production with each of the organisations and the people to really kind of develop up that messaging with them, so alongside them, rather than it being sort of dictated to by what JRF sort of wanted to say. Obviously, we went in and we knew kind of like what the organisations were doing, and the kind of like what they were doing was obviously something that we wanted to kind of put across. But beyond that, sort of the narrative of each film, we wanted really through each organisation and the people within it to shape it. So collaboration's a really key principle. But being authentic as well. So we obviously authentic sometimes is overused as a term, but we don't ever want to go in and sort of like stage anything, or sort of like we want to be led by what is real. So talking to people and finding out sort of what is representative to them. We, for example, when we did the film in with Changing Futures Northumbria, there was a guy in that film called Sean, and his journey was a really powerful one. Like he'd come from a place of sort of, he couldn't even leave his own house. Like he was he was in a really bad place. And I think when he'd first sort of had interaction with Changing Futures Northumbria, he'd spoken to one of the caseworkers, and he'd sort of said that one day he'd like to sort of like meet them, have one of the meetups, because they always meet up in certain places that are sort of like familiar to him, whether that's cafes or whatever. And one day he wanted to meet up at Suter Beach, which is like a beach in Sunderland. And now he's in an amazing place, and he's been through this journey with them. But that insight, we decided off of the back of those conversations that it'd really be fitting, as it looks obviously like the place it is in now as well, that we did the filming at Suter Beach. So we go in with that sort of real kind of like, we're wanting to kind of portray things in the right way. We don't want to go in and sort of, we spoke to organisations and asked them where in each place, where should we be filming? We didn't want to go in and sort of be like, oh, do a recce and sort of look around and sort of see, oh, these are the places we want to film at. We wanted for it to be really authentic and be led by sort of the organisation and the people who were featured. So that's a really fundamental principle. Empowering people as well. So showcasing that resilience and community strength, as we've touched on, is really important within the work that we do. So, for example, like you touched on earlier, the story of like Lizzie and sort of demonstrating through her story that sense of empowerment, that she was going on a journey. She was doing a lot of the work like herself. It's not. I mean, obviously, the Annex provide a platform and provide lots of support, but ultimately, she's sort of empowered like herself to do a lot of the stuff as well. So that's a really important thing, and showing that sort of resilience through our communications in that way as well is really key. Not showing people as sort of isolated or in despair, like not sort of like hopeful. So that's a really crucial aspect. The sort of hopeful angle is like, obviously visually as well. It kind of like interprets who we work with on projects in terms of who we commission as well. So we're really careful in terms of not wanting to stigmatize at all with the sort of like ways that we show communities or people in places, because obviously there's so much strength and hope in these places. Like, it's not all doom and gloom. Like, there might be really high levels of deprivation in a lot of these places that we've done the films, but ultimately, like, there's so much strength and empowerment that is within these communities that underpins them, from the people and through the organisations that we've kind of demonstrated through these films. So that sort of hopefulness is really key, and working with people who are able to work in that way, who are really sort of like able to communicate things in that sort of way is really crucial as well, to our principles. Listening as well, listening to people, whether that's through things being anonymized. If people want to, in the film, some people wanted to be featured visually, some people didn't. Some people wanted to provide sort of contributions, but not necessarily feature in the film. So really listening to people and adapting our approach. We didn't go in with one kind of approach for each film. We really listened and kind of developed things up with each organisation, and I think that's what we try and do really with that principle. We really try and listen to people. We don't go in with kind of a preset mindset of this is how we're going to do things. And I think that really sort of like ties in with another principle around informed consent as well, which is really crucial, and it's kind of a crucial kind of aspect, obviously, of ethical storytelling. But it's all about obviously making sure that the contributors are fully informed about where the contributions are going to be shared, how we're going to share them, for how long, and also having that open door as well to asking us any questions throughout a process as well, and also being comfortable with the fact that they can like withdraw the consent as well. So talking to us, withdrawing consent, that sort of thing as well is really kind of crucial to that aspect of it. So there's some of the kind of fundamental principles that we developed up as part of that project. And we now apply that. I mean, it's not, and just to say as well, those principles are not set in stone either. The kind of the principles that we keep kind of reflecting on each project that we do. they're never going to be set in stone and they're never going to be perfect. Like, I think that, and it's always sort of and that's an acceptance that, like, you're always sort of learning, and you never sort of like have got all the answers to these things. So I think that we're very much kind of in that space around these principles that we're always kind of looking to develop and improve them.
It's really interesting. I think there's loads there that I'd like to talk about, but time probably won't permit it. But for me, it's about engagement a lot. It shows in the films, plus also the value of engagement from yourselves as filmmakers. And there was one moment I think it's a Doncaster one, I might be wrong, where one of the workers said, well, at the beginning, we probably are doing 95% of the giving, and the person who is in crisis is perhaps giving 5%. But that ratio comes down and down until, that person is able then to be truly independent. And I think that's just so powerful. It's about process, isn't it, at all stages? And I think that's what you've done so well in terms of showing in this film, but also there's the behind the scenes, which you've been involved in, which is the preparing the ground for this, which I think has been fantastically done. And it's so succinct. I mean, 3 or 4 minutes and you're showing something very powerful. What I wonder is, though, as sort of a filmmaker and engaging in the process, it must be much more time consuming than an ordinary going in, right? We want you to stand up against this wall and, but it's sort of, is that a constraint, or is it Joseph Rowntree Foundation presumably recognises the value of investing time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was at the outset of this project, we had a few options in terms of kind of like how we went about in terms of commissioning as well. We could have gone down a route of commissioning a larger agency to kind of pick this work up and sort of do the majority of it. But we took the decision, we wanted to keep it really close to our team. We did that for a few reasons, really. Like, we wanted to sort of like keep things obviously like tight in terms of kind of developing up the ideas and the messaging with the organisation. So we obviously we've taken that decision. It was a conscious decision. We knew that it would be more time consuming as well on our side, because obviously we would be interacting with the organisations and the people involved, the filmmaker at every point of the journey. But I think that ultimately we took that decision because we felt it was the right thing to do, like both sort of like ensuring that ethically we were kind of able to follow our principles and develop those further, but also kind of like through obviously like the insights that Rachel could bring, and from a policy side, like obviously all those insights that we could bring into it as well. I think just sort of like it made sense to keep it small, and also we commissioned Zoe East to produce these films, and she's a brilliant like storyteller, filmmaker, and her approach is really brilliant in terms of like how she sort of interacts with communities. We were really conscious of kind of like sharing her work and her approach with the organisations as well before we started this work, to make sure they were on board with how we were going to go about it, what the kind of films were going to look like at the end as well. But ultimately it came down to me, Rachel and Zoe going out to each of these places. Both we met people on calls beforehand. We had quite a few calls with individuals, and then we went out to each location. We followed the wardens around in Doncaster.
We just hung out for a day and chatted to people and had lunch with them, and just got the sense of what people were doing, and it was great.
Just listening, just listen. It was just a case of listening, really, to sort of like and observing what was going on. And I think through that, and as being so connected, it was obviously more of a time commitment. But I think that the end results, it it definitely showed, like, I think in those final outputs that investment was worthwhile. So yeah, it was quite a big time commitment to go about in this way, but I think that the results are kind of worth it.
I think going back to JRF, you mentioned, I think we were given that flexibility to do that. We were enabled to do that. It wasn't that you can only work so much time on this. This is the only way we commission things. This is the only way that you should work. We were asked what we thought would be good, like what would make most sense for this type of project, and we got that support, and we were enabled to work in that way. And I think that's really important that you have that, because if you don't, you aren't able to do this work.
Timing wise as well, we weren't being sort of like, we weren't holding a deadline up against this project. I think that was very important, and I think a lesson from things that we've done before, that you can't really work in this way with organisations and contributors and sort of have a deadline that's sort of like you're working towards and moving things along. You've got to work at the pace that the contributors want to work at, and the organisations want to work at as well. So that was really crucial, and I think that was a real big positive of this project as well, that we didn't have that sort of time pressure on it. It was done over sort of like a few months. So like, it wasn't a sort of like a year-long project. It was done quite a relatively condensed time frame, but we weren't kind of being pressed by certain deadlines and stuff to move things along. So I think that was really key.
And is it usual, Ryan, to have a policy advisor as part of the crew? Because that's what I found really interesting, that Rachel was involved in it. And, obviously a lot, as you say, the key thing was letting people speak in the way that they want to speak and be heard. But obviously Rachel had that sort of the bigger policy perspective, I guess. So Rachel, what was your sort of experience of it, or Ryan, in terms of, because we were talking about the danger of silos and organisations operating in silos, and policy and the media team or comms don't really necessarily work together. So this seems like an interesting way of doing it. How do you think that worked? What were the benefits of that?
I couldn't wait to do a project like this. I absolutely love, in my spare time, I love film, I love photography. I'm really into it. So I think for me personally and professionally, I've always been interested in how we can use different forms of art, media to tell a story and to show the reality and to hear people and amplify people's voices who don't get heard often in policy or political debates. And so I think this was a great opportunity that arose to do this. And I think I just loved working with Ryan and Zoe. I think it didn't seem hard at all. It just felt natural. I guess you had Ryan, which was sort of the overall producer, pulling it together, Zoe, the filming, and then the policy was kind of more around the story, and pulling out what it is that we really wanted to amplify in terms of the policy changes that were needed, but the kind of the design of an innovation that's happening at the community level. So it kind of felt quite natural for me. And I think for me, it's something that I was always up for. I would seek it, and we were seeking it out. And I think I remember coming, we had the essays, and I was like, it'd be really good to somehow do these in films. Maybe we should do a short film series. And that was great. And then our content, Ryan can say more about it, but they've got such good skills and experience in, we mentioned there some of the photography that's kind of been produced has been kind of won in the Portrait of Britain. So we knew we had the skills in-house, and it just seemed a really good opportunity. And it isn't something that we've done I don't think we've done it before at JRF, really. So it was new to us as well. And I think we were all really surprised, but also really delighted with how it went. And it's just great. I don't know how else to explain it. We also got to like travel around together and go to Greg's outlets. I mean, which was great. I was just like, every place we went to, found the Greg's outlet, had a little dinner, chat, straight back in.
But again, you know, I mean, that is important on just, you know, as well as eating Greg's pasties or whatever. It's important for people from different departments to perhaps outside of the workplace, but in a professional context, exchange ideas and work, you know, across the silos. I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of organisations could learn from it. Any chance of any others? Has there been any discussion?
I don't know, Ryan. What do you think? How did you feel it went?
I think like it was brilliant working like in this way. Like I think that having a small team really helped. I think that if we were to have sort of like multiple people feeding into this, I think that's where it might have come unstuck a little bit. But because it was so focused, like, and it was primarily, like I say, sort of Rachel feeding in from a policy point of view, it really kind of like streamlined everything, and it kind of like it just elevated everything at each point, kind of through the process, because we were working on every element through from pre-production to production to post-production. Like it was kind of a really close small team that was working on it, so you were able to kind of like bring all these insights from the policy side in to obviously like the creative ideas and sort of like the storytelling side of it that Zoe was bringing to it as well. Like it kind of all came together quite well, I think, because it was quite a small team that was working on this. I think if it starts to grow and you start to get sort of more and more people's opinions and stuff thrown in, then obviously like that's quite challenging. But I think that from the JRF side, obviously that was really crucial. And then I think from obviously there's a lot of stakeholders that were working with the organisations and with the people, the contributors who were obviously featured in each of the films as well. I think that obviously having the organisations as that sort of benchmark to kind of like be the sort of point of contact, that we were really leaning on them a lot in terms of the contributors and who were in the best place to share the story, who were sort of like in that best place to kind of like sort of work with us on this. We were really leaning on them for that aspect of it. So it was kind of like it was a small team, but I think we were kind of like, there were quite, when you think about the number of people in the films and stuff, it was obviously like quite a lot of people involved in each film. But I think like it just really worked well in terms of kind of having a core kind of like small team around it to really kind of elevate the messages and get it to be representative of the people. And like just one other point as well, these films have just been nominated as I didn't want to forget for an award as well. So the Smiley's Film Awards, which are getting announced later in March, an award ceremony in the O2. I think it's like one of the biggest charity film awards in the UK. So the People Focused Doncaster film is actually a finalist in a category for that. So again, it's another way of like obviously showing how creating this sort of film in the way that we've created, and obviously like a demonstration of the sort of work that these organisations are doing, because ultimately it's their stories, it's their narrative.
And they're coming with us. They're coming down. We've got them coming down, haven't we?
The final to the O2.
So there's going to be 3 people from People Focus Group, including one of the leaders of the Warden programme, coming down with me, Rachel and Zoe to that. So I think it's another example there of kind of like the impact that this kind of approach and work can have. It goes beyond kind of the initial kind of objectives, obviously, of the work, but for it to get recognised in that sort of way is obviously like sort of demonstrates the sort of impact and the way of working.
It gets you out to a wider audience as well, doesn't it? Which is really important. And when is that? When's the award final?
20th of March.
20th of March.
Yeah.
We wait with bated breath. We hope you're successful. We'll put links to the films, all of the films, underneath this, so people can just click on those and go to and see them. And I really do encourage people to. And I think in terms of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, I think this sort of storytelling is so important, and I was really also impressed by the Emerging Futures program that the JRF has, because I mean it's a bit of a mantra for me really on these podcasts, but I think that imagining is so important. It's something that I keep saying progressives or whatever you want to call people who are looking for social and environmental change. We've been historically very bad at doing, I think, in terms of saying things do not have to be like this. We can be like this. And I really would encourage people to have a look on the website, the JRF website, at the Emerging Futures page, because it has things like experiments in collective imagination and asking people to say, well, what would you like to see? What sort of world would you like to see? What would your neighborhood, what would you like to see happen there, ideally? So it's something concrete that people can work towards, and get out of this stock perception that this is the way it is, because it's not the way it should be. So I really encourage people to have a look at that as well. We'll put a link to it, the Emerging Futures page. I just want to say a big thank you to both of you for giving us the time. I hope many more people watch the film on SDG Vision. And, from the point of view of the Sustainable Development Goals, you tick a lot of the 17 goals. I mean, there are some naturally you're probably not going to tick, but I think that one of the main ones is partnership for the goals, which, you engage in partnership working with organizations and people and also sharing your work. And I just want to say, we want to see more films. They're very powerful, and they're stories that need to be told. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been great to share it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, cheers. Bye.
Bye.